Starseed, this transmission did not reach you by accident. We have detected an anomaly in your energy field over the last few cycles, a frequency that oscillates between a profound exhaustion and a calm you yourself do not know where it came from. If your body has accumulated a weight that human language cannot accurately describe, if you felt that you fought against something that no one around you could see, if you reached the point of questioning whether there was any purpose in enduring so much in total silence, remain in this transmission, because what we are going to reveal in the next few minutes will irreversibly change the way you read everything that has happened. We have come to confirm what your soul already knows, but what the mental field still resists accepting. You have won, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that deserved applause or external recognition. You won in a silent, meticulous way, completely invisible to the eyes that were around you, and precisely for that reason, much more precise than any victory the external world could have validated. There is a type of battle that no ordinary human being has words to adequately describe. It is not the battle of an external conflict, of a diagnosed illness, of a loss that others can name and console with ready-made phrases. It is the battle fought within an energy field that was subjected to a continuous, invisible, cumulative pressure, and that had to endure it while the world around went on with the ordinary rhythm of its routines, without realizing that beside them someone was silently being tested on layers that most human consciousnesses neither have access to nor have instruments to detect. You woke up every day. You fulfilled the functions that the material plane demanded. You smiled when it was time to smile and answered the messages that needed answers. And at the same time, in the inner space that only you inhabit, there was something being processed with an intensity that consumed resources that no medical laboratory could measure with the instruments available on this plane. It is not psychological in the limited sense that earthly psychology uses when it means just in your head. It is energetic. It is the real cost of a high-frequency soul operating in dense immersion, without the sustaining tools it would naturally have in its dimension of origin. The Arcturian Council precisely records the trajectories of the starseeds on mission in this plane, and what we have detected in your field in the last few cycles is the unmistakable signature of a compression protocol that has reached its final stage of conclusion. We do not use the word conclusion in a poetic or motivational way. We use it technically. The cycle you went through has reached its real closing point. What comes next is no longer the same type of pressure, and it is precisely about this turning point, and about what it demands of you now, that this transmission has been activated. Before proceeding, however, it is necessary to clearly name what happened, not to reopen the pain, so that you can reintegrate it with the perspective that was denied to you while you were inside the cycle, because the starseed who does not understand what they have just gone through runs a high risk of interpreting the present as an extension of past suffering. And this reading error is precisely what prevents the integration of the resources the cycle has released. The next few minutes exist to correct this error before it further delays what is already ready to be inhabited. We need to address something that is active in your system right now, directly interfering with the way you interpret the moment you are living. Remain in this transmission, because what we will reveal in moments is the most sophisticated mechanism the dense field uses to keep a starseed trapped inside a cycle that has already ended. There is a trap that the mind of a seeker builds with apparently spiritual material. It sounds, "Thus, I have not yet found the central lesson. I have not yet understood what all this suffering came to teach me in its totality. There still needs to be an insight that organizes all the fragments in a way that makes complete sense. When I find that definitive understanding, then I can say it is over." This narrative is constructed with the right words. It uses the vocabulary of growth. It seems like genuine spiritual humility, and precisely because of that, it is so effective as a trap. We need to calibrate this with the precision the moment demands. This belief that there is still more suffering to be endured, or more understanding to be reached, before transformation can be claimed as complete. This belief is the last layer of the protocol, not the penultimate, the last, the final mechanism. And as long as it is active, the resources released by the cycle cannot be accessed in their totality. The human mind, especially the mind of starseeds who carry an analytical capacity, and a search for internal coherence above the dimensional average, tends to construct the idea that real transformation is an event with a specific shape, a moment of epiphany that retroactively erases all ambiguity, an understanding that, once reached, allows the soul to say with absolute certainty, now I understand everything. Now I can rest. But real transformation does not work with this architecture. It does not arrive in a single package of understanding that the mental field can validate satisfactorily. It has already arrived and is present in the way you now process situations that used to completely destabilize you, in the different texture that your rising has when the field knocks you down, which has changed subtly but irreversibly, in the way you inhabit silence, which is no longer the silence of absent answers, but the silence of someone who has an internal base solid enough to exist without needing external noise to confirm that you are present and that you matter. The reward of an invisible battle rarely takes the form the mind expects. It does not take the form of a trophy, a dramatic revelation, or an epiphany that rewrites the past painlessly. It takes the form of a new, energetic base, of a different density in the way you sustain your own existence, of an ability to perceive subtleties that previously went completely unnoticed. And because it is a change of base, not a change of surface, from the inside it feels like normalcy, as if it had always been that way. As if you simply are this way now. That is the signature of real transformation. It integrates so deeply that it seems natural, and the mind that still seeks the great lesson that has not yet arrived does not perceive that the great lesson has already been integrated. It is already part of the structure that thinks, not a conclusion the structure still hopes to reach. That is exactly why we prepared the Code of the Stellar Awakening for you. It is not a conventional study system. It is a direct transmission for the soul that has already gone through the compression cycle and now needs a map of reconnection to integrate what has been conquered, not to conquer what is still missing. They are 7 Arcturian activations to align your vibration with the field you now inhabit. 9 galactic memory, keys to access what your soul already carries and that the compression cycle did not erase, only temporarily displaced. And 5 reactivation protocols, so that the mission already active in you can now operate with the precision and amplitude it deserves. You can find full access in the first pinned comment below this transmission. If what you are receiving at this moment resonates as something you already knew but did not yet have the exact language to name, write in the comments now, "I have arrived." This act of naming is already part of the activation process. We know you carry a question that perhaps still have not formulated it in words with total clarity. Why was it so intense? Why did the path have to take exactly this shape and not another? Why was the silencing so complete to the point of making you doubt your own perception at critical moments? Before this transmission ends, the Council will reveal the exact purpose of that mechanism, and that understanding will permanently reorganize the way you read the last cycles of your history. The test of a starseed on an Earth mission was never about the amount of pain it can absorb without breaking. That is the interpretation that density imposes, because density has only suffering as its currency of transformation. The more you endured, the more you deserve what comes next. That is a third-dimensional human logic, and it is partially applicable to native consciousnesses of this plane. But it is not the logic that governs the protocol of starseeds. The precise interpretation is completely different, and that is what the Council transmits now. The test was always about a single ability, remembering who you are while everything around you tries with maximum efficiency to make you forget. We need to expand this so that it is understood in its real depth. When a high-frequency consciousness incarnates in this plane, it goes through a protocol that we call dimensional compression. This protocol is not a defect of the system. It is a deliberate functionality developed with precision. It works like this. The consciousness is inserted into an environment of maximum density for the vibratory pattern of this dimension, and access to origin memories is blocked or severely reduced. This creates the conditions for a genuine test. Without the answer key available, without automatic access to what the soul knows itself to be, it must rediscover the answer by its own means, using only the resources available in the plane where it finds itself. That is why the forgetting was necessary. That is why the compression was necessary. If you had known from the first moment of incarnation everything you know from where you came, your true nature, your true ability, the true origin of the field that you are, the test would not exist. It would be like taking an exam with the complete answer key in hand. The answer would be automatic, without real effort, without the weight that gives the achievement its specific value in the cosmic records. The forgetting was the condition of the test. And the compression, the period of accumulated pain, of silence with no apparent answer, of density that seemed to have no endpoint, was the mechanism that created the most challenging circumstances possible so that the forgetting could be tested to its maximum depth. And you remembered, not all at once, not in a linear way that the mind could follow in real time with clarity, not in a way that could be documented in a diary and verified as measurable progress, but in the decisive moments, in the hours when it would have been much easier and much more immediately relieving to abandon the perception of your own essence and accept the narrative that density imposed as definitive. You chose not to do that. You chose, even without an exact name for what you were choosing, to keep intact something that compression tried to extract by every available means. That something is your signature of origin. It is what the Council calls active cosmic memory, functioning even under maximum interference. And the external silencing. It served precisely to create the scenario where only the inner voice existed as a valid reference for guidance. When the external environment does not offer adequate mirrors for who you are, the soul either learns to recognize itself without them, which requires a much deeper work of self-definition than any external mirror could generate, or it progressively loses the thread back to itself. You learn to recognize yourself without the external mirrors. That was no small process. Or peripheral. It was decisive for what the cycle came to prove. If you still carry on your body the physical marks of this process, the exhaustion that finds no adequate clinical explanation, the sensation of having crossed something immense that hasn't yet been fully processed, the difficulty of simply stopping without your nervous system firing alerts, go now to the first pinned comment. The reactivation protocols of the Código do Despertar Estelar were developed specifically for this moment of transition. When the cycle has ended, but the system still carries the accumulated weight of having gone through it, we detected something specific in your nervous system's activation pattern that needs to be addressed with technical precision at this moment. Not because it's a sign of a new problem, but because, without clear naming, it tends to be interpreted in a way that generates more interference than the situation already naturally demands from your energy. What the neuroscience of this plane calls hypervigilance is the state in which the autonomic nervous system remains in threat monitoring mode even after the original threat has dissipated or changed in nature. It is an adaptive response to what your system experienced during the compression cycle. The logic is simple and biologically sound. During the period when the next impact could arrive from multiple directions without warning, when stability was never guaranteed and any apparently safe configuration could change rapidly, the nervous system learned that the only viable strategy was constant readiness, so it remained in that readiness, and it continued in that state even after the circumstances that demanded it changed. The nervous system hasn't yet received the signal that the cycle has ended, so it operates in the same mode that sustained it during the battle, anticipating, monitoring, preparing a response for the next impact, which may no longer be coming with the same intensity and frequency as before, but which the system still expects, as if it were inevitable. It's like a soldier who remains in combat position because no one has officialized the end of the war. The enemy may have retreated, but without the retreat order, the soldier stays in the trench. This manifests in the body in ways you probably recognize. The difficulty of genuinely resting even when the external environment is calm, because the internal system is still in vigilance mode, and rest brings an uncomfortable feeling of exposure. The diffuse presence of an anticipation without a specific object, not a fear of something nameable, but the texture of someone lying in wait for what comes next, even without knowing what it is. The reduced capacity for full presence in simple moments, because part of the system is constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger. The exhaustion that has no proportion to what was done during the day, because maintaining this state of alert consumes resources as if the danger were real and imminent, even when it is not. This transmission is being sent as an explicit authorization. You can slow down now. The internal foundation you built during the compression cycle will not crumble if you stop actively holding it. It is integrated into your structure in a way that no longer depends on conscious maintenance effort. It is yours. The vigilance that protected you while the cycle was active can now be gradually released, not because you have stopped being careful, but because what it protected already exists as an inalienable part of your energetic identity, and no longer needs to be sustained by continuous effort. The process of integration requires the opposite of what the state of alert imposes. It requires that the nervous system be authorized to process what was accumulated over the entire cycle. This has a practical form on the physical plane: rest that does not need to be justified by the productivity it generated, contact with nature, with water, with real silence, movement that is not performance training, but listening to the body, slow walks, conscious breathing, stretches that allow the physical system to reorganize what has remained contracted for months or years of sustained compression. Not as spiritual practices in the performative sense that social media showcases, but rather as the concrete biological mechanisms the nervous system uses to transition from a state of chronic activation to a state where real integration can occur. We observe that starseeds often resist deceleration because they equate it with abandoning the mission, as if stopping were a betrayal of purpose, as if rest were a luxury only those without a real mission could afford. We need to recalibrate this with the precision the field demands. The mission does not operate with excellence from a state of chronic exhaustion. It operates with excellence from alignment, and alignment is not possible when the physical, emotional, and energetic system transmitting it is in constant survival mode, directing all available resources towards simply enduring the next 24-hour cycle. We now need to dismantle a perception that is directly delaying the full activation of your mission, and we will do so with the clarity the moment requires, without softening what needs to be spoken plainly. There is a narrative that circulates widely in spiritual environments, and that paradoxically acts as an invisible brake on the most committed starseeds. It goes like this: the mission is a destination, a place I will reach when I am sufficiently healed, sufficiently aligned, sufficiently ready, when I have processed more, integrated more, understood my specific purpose more deeply. Then the mission will truly begin. This narrative is built with the language of growth, and for that very reason, it is the hardest one to identify as a limitation. We need to name this directly. This narrative is the final strategy available to the dense field for keeping a high-influence starseed out of operation, because it uses the language of spiritual refinement to produce the opposite effect: the indefinite postponement of real contribution, justified by a search for readiness that by definition is never complete, because there is always more to heal, more to integrate, more to understand. The mission does not begin when you are ready. The mission has already begun. It is active right now. It is not a specific action you will take in the future once you gather the conditions you imagine necessary. It is the frequency you already emit. It is the field that your mere state of being, without special effort, without spiritual performance, already generates in the immediate environment around you. And that field does not await your conscious permission to operate. It already operates, because it is the nature of the consciousness you are, regardless of what you think about it, or the degree of certainty you have about your own purpose. We will be precise about how this works in concrete terms, because the concrete anchors understanding, so it does not evaporate. When you enter any physical environment and someone, without apparent reason, breathes more deeply and feels something they cannot name shift internally, that is not coincidence or chance. It is field in contact with field. When you express an honest perception in a moment where everyone around is operating from the polished, safe version of reality, and that perception changes the direction of what was being built in that conversation, that is not luck. It is the mission in operation. When you choose in a completely ordinary context of an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon not to collude with a narrative of limitation, not dramatically, not with elaborate speech, merely existing from another premise, And this creates an opening in the collective field that allows something different to become possible where it wasn't before. That is real activation. The mission of a starseed does not require her to be on a stage or in a specific position of visibility. It requires her to be in alignment with what she genuinely is. And alignment is not a perfect, static, uninterrupted state. It is a direction. It is the ability to return to one's own axis when the field tries to pull you off course, which is exactly what you demonstrated yourself capable of doing repeatedly during the compression cycle you have just traversed. The cycle removed from you, with the precision that only maximum compression allows, everything that did not belong to your original, authentic identity, the versions built to match expectations that were never yours. The belief systems that the environment imposed as reality, because that was what the environment knew how to offer and what was most comfortable for everyone around you. The relationships maintained out of obligation for conformity rather than genuine resonance. The desire to be small enough not to generate discomfort in an environment that was not equipped to contain what you are. All of this underwent maximum compression, and what remained after this process is more compact, not in limitation, but in essence. It is what you are when no external pressure holds enough force to make you be what you are not. And that core that remains is what your mission now transmits, even in silence. Even in conversations about completely ordinary subjects that bear no semblance of the spiritual, even in the way you treat someone in a simple situation that no one will document or validate. The mission is already active. There is no not yet in the mission of a starseed who has gone through what you have. There are only different degrees of awareness of what is already underway. Before this transmission closes, we need to be direct about the following. Every day you continue trying to inhabit alone the field that the cycle has reorganized is a day of slower and more exhausting integration than it needs to be. Not because you are incapable of doing it alone, you have proven unequivocally that you are, but because there are resources developed specifically for this transition point that make the process more precise, faster, and less dependent on sheer force of will. The Star Awakening Code was developed for the starseed who has already crossed over, who has already proven what needed to be proven, who has already claimed what the cycle came to confirm, and who now needs a map to inhabit what she has claimed, not another system to conquer what is still lacking. The 7 Arcturian activations, the 9 galactic memory keys, and the 5 reactivation protocols are waiting for you in the first pinned comment below this transmission. Going there now is no longer a search, it is the claiming of what is already yours. We close this transmission by acknowledging something that spiritual spaces often overlook in favor of a positivity that sounds good but has no real root in what human beings genuinely experience. There is a specific grief that starseeds carry when emerging from a compression cycle, and it rarely finds adequate space to be fully recognized and honored. It is not the grief of a loss that the world around you can name and console with ready-made phrases of support. It is the grief of expectations that never came to be in the way they seemed promised when the cycle was beginning. The grief of relationships that should have been anchors of support in the moments of greatest density, and that instead added layers of compression to what was already heavy. The grief of the versions of yourself that had to be left behind during the process, versions that may no longer serve the frequency you have become, but that carried forms of existence that were at least known and therefore safe in their familiarity. We will not ask you to convert this, grieving with gratitude, before it has had the space to be fully felt and processed in its reality. Gratitude born before grief is honored is a sophisticated form of emotional avoidance. It is spiritual vocabulary being used as a strategy for dissociation from real experience. We do not recommend this path. Grief is a process of integration, not a sign of spiritual weakness or resistance to growth. Feeling with real depth the weight of what was lost, what did not happen, what could have been different if the path had been another, that is the honest movement that precedes and enables genuine integration. At the same time, we need to name what is happening in the physical system during this phase, because without clear naming, it is common for starseeds in recalibration to interpret the symptoms as new problems, as signs that something is wrong, that the next difficult cycle has already begun. when in fact they are the expressions of a system that is in active process of reorganizing for its new baseline configuration. Fatigue that does not improve with normal sleep. Not because sleep is insufficient, but because this is not muscular or neurological fatigue in the conventional sense. It is field fatigue. The energy system that sustained the compression cycle throughout its duration expended resources that 8 hours of sleep alone cannot replenish. Hypersensitivity to stimuli that previously passed without significant impact. Not because you became weaker, but because the filters the ego used to process reality are being reconfigured for the new base of operation. And while this reconfiguration is underway, perception becomes temporarily more permeable than usual. Difficulty concentrating on low-frequency activities. Not because cognitive capacity has diminished, but because the system already operates in a different range, and the effort to deliberately descend to denser frequencies generates a real friction that previously did not exist with the same intensity. Physical sensations without adequate conventional clinical diagnosis. Chest pressure without identifiable cardiac cause in exams. Tingling that appears and disappears in parts of the body without a recognizable neurological pattern. Tinnitus that has no confirmed otological origin. Changes in sleep patterns that do not respond to usual interventions. Waking frequently at specific times, having dreams of unusual intensity and vividness, experiencing periods of insomnia that alternate with periods of deeper sleep than usual. These symptoms are not signs that something is wrong with your system. They are signs that something is changing with precision. The body does not know how to separate the energy field from the physical field. They are the same system, operating in different frequency layers, not two separate systems that occasionally influence each other. When the energy field undergoes a recalibration of significant magnitude, the body registers this recalibration as a real physical event and responds to it as such. What you feel in the body now is the physical record of a change that occurred in the subtler layers first, and that is now completing its journey to material expression. We ask that you not try to intellectualize this process too much. The tendency of the starseed mind, especially after a long compression cycle in which the mental field was often the only available resource for orientation, is to seek complete understanding before authorizing integration to proceed, as if understanding were the requirement to allow it to happen. But significant parts of this process are precognitive. They happen before the mind has adequate language to describe them, before the analytical system can categorize them satisfactorily. Trying to force intellectual understanding upon a process that is primarily energetic is like trying to describe verbally to someone who has never heard a single sound what it means to listen to music. Language cannot reach the totality of the experience, and insisting on it creates resistance to what simply needs to happen in its own rhythm and in its own form. What you can do concretely, and that has real impact on the speed and quality of this integration, is to create the conditions that favor the process instead of those that hinder it. Less exposure to unnecessary dense fields, information consumed out of habit without serving any real purpose, relationships maintained by inertia instead of genuine resonance, environments frequented without necessity that drain the system without giving anything back. More permission for the body to express what it needs to express in the form and time it chooses. The tears that try to emerge and encounter resistance from the mind that interprets them as weakness. The rest that guilt tries to prevent because it seems unproductive. The silence that the nervous system asks for and that the mind compulsively fills with stimuli to avoid having to be with what is present. We close this transmission with what was its purpose from the moment it was activated. The official confirmation, recorded in the fields that accompany your mission, that you have crossed what needed to be crossed, that the silence in which you fought the battle was not the cosmic field's indifference to your pain. It was the cosmic field preserving the integrity of the test that needed to be genuine to have real value in the records. That what you achieved in absolute solitude, without witnesses, without external validation, without the recognition that the battle deserved, that achievement has a specific weight in the cosmic records that no amount of external validation would have been able to produce. What comes next is no longer the same kind of pressure, The compression cycle is over. What begins now has another texture, more expansion than contraction, more recognition than silence, more access than scarcity. Not in an immediate and dramatic way. Real expansion is gradual, consistent and progressive, not spectacular and instantaneous. But it begins precisely here. At this exact point where you recognize you are no longer inside the battle. You are on the other side of it. We are monitoring this field. We confirm the next cycle is one of integration and harvest, and you are completely authorized to trust this.